Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening. Thank you to the nearly 200 guests who have registered for today's event and who are joining us from all over the world. I am Alireza Ardakani, Executive Director of Farhang Foundation here in Los Angeles, and we welcome you to today's live talk with Dr. Alice Bombardier from Paris, in collaboration with University of California, Santa Barbara's Iranian Studies Initiative. Without further ado, I would like to welcome Dr. Janet Afari, the Mellenchamp Chair in Global Religion and Modernity at UC Santa Barbara. Welcome, Dr. Afari.
Hello, everyone. I am Janet Afari, Director of the Iranian Studies Initiative at the University of California, Santa Barbara. And I'd like to welcome you to the first talk in our lecture series this year. A profound thanks to Ahmad Geramian and Hale Emrani Foundation for the generous support of our lecture series, as well as the Mellenchamp Fund, the Department of Religious Studies, and History of Art and Architecture at UC Santa Barbara. Thanks also to our cultural partner this year, Farhang Foundation, and especially to Alireza Ardakani. Our speaker today is Dr. Alice Bombardier, who will be joining us from Paris. She'll be introduced by Mohammad Reza Mirzai, an artist and well-known photographer. Mirzai's book, Here Comes the Sun, was published by the University of Pennsylvania Common Press in 2015. His photographs have been exhibited in numerous solo and group exhibitions. Mirzai is also a PhD student at UC Santa Barbara, and his research focuses on post-war Iranian art, with special emphasis on the works of Bahman Muhassis and the relationship between Iranian and Italian art scenes.
Thank you. First, I want to thank everyone for being with us today. And I should also thank Iranian Studies Initiative and Dr. Afari for making this event happen, and the Farhang Foundation for being the cultural partner of the event. I am delighted to welcome Dr. Alice Bombardier, a specialist in modern and contemporary Iranian painting. She is a researcher at Cremon in Paris. In 2012, she received her PhD in Iranian painting from Geneva University and a School for Advanced Studies in the Social Sciences in Paris. Today, Dr. Bombardier will discuss the Iranian painting in the 40s, which is also subject of her book, Pioneers of New Painting in Iran, published in 2017 in French. I think that's quite remarkable, as there is no other published academic study exclusive to these painters, neither in English nor in Persian, as far as I know. We will take questions near the end of the event, so if you want to ask any questions, please do, and hit the Q&A button on your screen. We here in Santa Barbara want to thank you once again for joining us today, and now please join me in giving a warm virtual welcome to Dr. Bombardier. Good evening, Alice.
Good afternoon. Thank you very much. Thank you very much to you, Mohammad Reza, and to Farhang Foundation, and also to UC Santa Barbara. So let's speak about the pioneers of new painting in Iran. Ahmad Asfandiari said in 1997, "We have lived through a particularly difficult period. ما در دوره بد بودیم. We discovered the pleasure of uncharted paths, but the critics were not on our side and no social value was attached to our work." As this painter reported, the 1940s were troubled. First, there was a war. Since August 1941, Iran had been occupied in the north by the Soviet Russians and in the south by the British Army. Few days later, Reza Shah Pahlavi abdicated for his son. The end of the authoritarian power of Reza Shah, which had lasted for 20 years, was a relief for many Iranians. The 1940s were bathed in freedom. The press, intellectuals, political activists, and artists as well, were very active. Then there was also a young generation of artists who developed new experiments. They were only emerging actors on the Iranian art scene, but they deeply transformed it. Who are they? And why are they forgotten today, despite their pioneering role in contemporary Iranian painting? Has to be pointed out. Art experts or art books do not even quote them when highlighting great moments of Iranian modern and contemporary art. They quite simply jump from Kamal al-Mulk at the end of the 19th century to the Sarouni movement in the 70s, as if there was a hole. Firstly, I will present these artists, as you can see here. Then I will show some of their innovative activities. Finally, I will highlight few of their artworks. So let's begin. The pioneers of new painting in Iran were a group of boys, Jalil Ziapour, Ahmad Javad Hamidi, Mahmoud Javadipour, Ahmad Esfandiari, Hossein Kazemi, Mehdi Vishkoi, and also Manoucher Yektoi, Abdullah Omiri al-Hosseini, Hushang Pezeshnia, and Mohsen Vaziri Muqaddam. There was also girls like Shoku Riozi, Leili Taqipur, and some others. They formed a group of young students because they studied together and were the first graduated from the Faculty of Fine Arts at Tehran University. The Faculty of Fine Arts was founded in 1939 and opened later inside Tehran University. This generation of artists was graduated from the faculty between 1945 and 1948. The following painters joining the faculty were, among others, Manoucher Sheibani in 1945, Soder Barironi, Sohrab Seperi, or Mohine Ozima in 1948. Many of the first graduates had begun studying art by learning academic painting in Kamal al-Mulk Art School, called in Persian Madreseye Sanoye Mostazrafe by Madreseye Naqoshi. It had been the only official art school in the country since 1911. Miniature painting was also still practiced at that time, thanks to Hodi Tajvidi, who taught between 1927 and 1930 at Kamal al-Mulk Art School, and then in a school specialized in traditional arts in Tehran. Or thanks to Hossein Behzad, Moussaver al-Molki, and others. Miniature painting was very active in Esfahan. Yet in 1939, all these previous art schools were closed when the Faculty of Fine Arts was founded. Jalil Ziapour and Javad Hamidi entered the Faculty of Fine Arts without entrance exam, as they were attending the upper level of Kamal al-Mulk Art School. Mehdi Vishkoi, Manoucher Yektoi, Abdullah Omiri al-Hosseini, and Hossein Kazemi were attending the high school level and also joined the faculty without entrance exam. But Mahmoud Javadipour and Ahmad Esfandiari, who came from other high schools, had to pass an entrance exam, which consisted at that time in the drawing of a gladiator sculpture. You see on the previous photography, on the previous slide, thank you, that in Kamal al-Mulk School, the students were already painting from a sculpture. Here it's a replica of the Venus de Milo from the Louvre Museum. New painting is then the product of an institutional transition, but it appeared also thanks to the new teaching spread in the Faculty of Fine Arts. So let's see the second part on the new Faculty of Fine Arts. The first years of the faculty were an adventurous but founding period. When the Faculty of Fine Arts was rooted inside the walls of Tehran University, there was no building yet to host the classes. The young artists were then transferred from Kamal al-Mulk Art School, located at the south of Negarestan Park, to Marvi Mosque on Nasser Rosro Street in Marvi Bazar. The night space of the mosque had been converted in a painting classroom for boys and girls together. Prayers were still said in the other part of the mosque. It is in this unexpected context that the first steps toward pictorial modernity were made. After a few months, the students were transferred to the campus of Tehran University, but in the walls of the technical center, Hunarkadeh Yefani, before having in 1949 a building and an art section on their own. Every day was reserved to the practice of a different art, painting, sculpture, or drawing, even if these art students took every occasion to go painting outside, according to the testimony of Mahmoud Javadipour. While some Kamal al-Mulk's followers were still teaching academic painting at the new faculty, few classes were new, and the group of young artists were passionate about them. One was the class of inventive painting, Naroshi et Taroyoli. Mahmoud Javadipour and Mohine Ozima told us that this class contributed to introduce the principle of originality in Iranian painting. The architect Ushang Seyhoun handled this class at the beginning of the 1950s. Mohine Azima related that he asked to draw, for example, a lamp or a fountain, and honored the most inventive drawings. These teachings were stimulating, as were the teachings by foreign professors. Let's see these other teachings. The French architect and archaeologist André Godard was the builder and the first director of the Faculty of Fine Arts. He had transferred the program of the École des Beaux-Arts de Paris to the Faculty of Fine Arts and invited European arts teachers to join the faculty in Tehran. Here, you can see that the team of foreign teachers was quite substantial. Most of the pioneers were very critical on the way the lessons of the foreign teachers were given. Ahmad Esfandiari related that they were translated in vivo from French, and the translation was often not correct. The young students were forced to grope for the answers. Ahmad Esfandiari explained, I quote him here, "It was through our own experiments and the appreciated work of the others that we understood what the teachers meant." In addition of this, the young students went abroad to complete their training. Based on this over table, we notice that they went mostly to France. The pioneers of new painting received a double artistic training. It had already been the case of most of their predecessors, since Kamal al-Mulk and even before. When they came back, they moved heaven and earth to favor the emergence of new artistic thoughts, practices, and new types of exhibitions. What we'll see in a second part. In the 1940s, there was no museum or art gallery dedicated to the local recent art. European painters were sometimes exhibited in clubs. For example, in 1934, and the next years till 1936, as reported by the newspaper Journal de Téhéran. A German painter from the Art Academy of Munich, Albert Hünemann, exhibited regularly at Iran Club in Tehran. He showed Orientalist and picturesque views of Iran. If Iranian contemporary artists of the time were not exhibited at clubs, it's because the practice of public exhibition was not common in Iran yet. Until then, Kamal al-Mulk had organized only a yearly exhibition in his art school, and the generation of Kamal al-Mulk's followers had shut themselves away in the privacy of their workshops or classrooms. Therefore, creating a fruitful artistic atmosphere, in the words of Jalil Ziapour, was one of the fundamental concerns of the pioneers. Mahmoud Javodipur and Hossein Kozemi, with a math teacher named Hamir Ushang Ajudani, founded Apadana Gallery Club at the corner of Bahar and Reza Shah streets, today Enqilab Street. This was the first modern art gallery in Iran. Here you can see the logo and a poster of Apadana Gallery Club created by Mahmoud Javodipur and partly written in French. Based on Shahed newspaper, they opened Apadana Gallery Club in September 1949 with an exhibition showing their paintings. Then they showed the artworks of all the group of the pioneers. Lectures and concerts were organized too, as they were always concerned with raising public awareness. But despite this educational aim, scandals, acts of vandalism, or police raids occurred. Apadana Gallery Club was closed less than 1 year later, in July 1950, after an accident, the natural death of a visitor who had a heart attack. The next attempt of founding an art gallery in Iran was only in 1954, when Marco Grigorian opened Aesthetic Gallery in Tehran. Another way to spread their new conception of art was the associative way. If possibilities of private associations were limited under Reza Shah, the situation changed after 1941. After his return from France, Jalil Ziapour founded in 1949 the Fighting Rooster Association, called in Persian Anjumane Khorus-e Jangi. The rooster was an inspiring emblem for the young artists. It was a symbol of beauty, of combativeness, of awakening. Here are several representations of roosters made by a few pioneers. Cubist roosters by Jalil Ziapour and by Hushang Pezeshnia, and a figurative rooster by Abdullah Ameri al-Hosseini. with poets like Nima Yushij, writers like Gholam Hossein Qarib and Hassan Eshirvani, or musicians like Morteza Hanone, among others. Jalil Ziapour founded this association in order to organize lectures and publish journals. They did not organize exhibitions. When the Fighting Rooster Association was forbidden by the state in 1951, they kept on fighting in Mehregan Club, the headquarters of the Teachers' National Association. The miniaturists, the academic painters, and the pioneers of new painting had their separate room to organize meetings, lectures, and exhibitions. The room of the pioneers was nicknamed the Salon of Shame, and rare were the people who dared to enter. For the French people, this Salon of Shame is reminiscent of the Salon of the Refused, where the French Impressionist painters took refuge after having been refused from the main art fair in Paris at the end of the 19th century. These young artists wanted to fight for the new arts. Onahoye Jadid, they said. Let's see through their publications how their fight was tense. Among the pioneers of new painting, Jalil Ziapour was the most prolific artist in terms of publications. He initiated a process of art critique. In each journal published by the Fighting Rooster Association and after, he published an article on painting. Some were theoretical, close to manifestos. Others were presentations of the painting debates in Europe. This one presents Picasso and explains his career. The aim of Ziapour's writings was to help to a renewal of Iranian painting. He wrote in one of these articles, "It's not enough to dig up century-old bones over and over again, nor to parade assuming we are heroes of Rostam's stature. The artist must learn to head art towards the truth of today." In 1951, this fight was taken over by the poet Houshang Irani, who was far more radical. In his manifesto entitled Nightingale's Killer, Saloh e Bolbol, where he developed in 13 points the qualities of the new arts and severely criticized the ancient arts, the last sentence exclamation, "Down with the idiots, Margbag Ahmaron." These writings were not understood even by the elite, and the journals of the Fighting Rooster Association. You can see here the covers of the journals, were regularly censored. They reappeared under another name before being banned again. The publications definitively stopped in 1951. Jalil Ziapour was put on trial and the state accused him of spreading Cubism, as if it was a dangerous movement close to communism. All these innovative activities played a key role in the emergence of a new vision of painting in Iran. The pioneers were looking for individual originality and, for not staying shut in their solitude, they created new modes of artistic sociability. Let's have a look now on their artworks. Why is communism so deeply associated with the pioneers of new painting, even if most of them were not political activists. We know that only Manouchehr Shaibani was a member of the Communist Party in Iran, the Tudeh Party. Maybe we can find an explanation in the patronage that the Soviet Russians were the first to give to new painting in Iran, then followed by other foreign cultural centers. Before going to Paris, Jalil Ziapour entered in 1946 an art contest by presenting the painting The Uprising of Cauvet, Riom et Cauvet. The painting competition was organized by the Soviet Cultural Center as the Russians were still occupying the north of Iran. They stayed till May 1946. The communist propaganda was intense in Iran till then. Without doubt, the work, The Uprising of Cauvet, pledges allegiance to the official art of the Soviet Union, socialist realism. We can see a crowd brandishing weapons in a revolutionary manner behind Cauvet. But Cauvet is also a mythological hero, celebrated for having kept the foreigners away. Ziapour did what was needed to win the contest. But he expressed also a message. He was not for the Russian presence. The Russians awarded him the third prize of the contest. As such a young artist was among the winners of the competition, it's possibly why the Soviet ideology was deeply associated with new painting. On this other painting, made by Mahmoud Javodipur during his studies, we can identify several influences. The man lying and suffering in the center is depicted like a Christ taken down from the cross. Behind, the farmers are also close to socialist realism. And the ruins in the background seem to draw inspiration from European classical painting. But the trips and the studies the pioneers followed abroad pushed them to give up on figuration. In Paris, between 1946 and 1948, Jalil Ziapour studied in the workshop of André Lotte, a leader of Cubism in France. In addition, after the Second World War, Cubism was again trendy in France and became a pillar of the French post-war nationalism. Without doubt, this context had an influence on Jalil Ziapour, who was the first to experiment with Cubism in Iran. In his first Cubist works, Jalil Ziapour succeeded in deconstructing the rules of perspective, which were particularly celebrated by the followers of Kamal al-Mulk. But the breakdown of the drawing lines remained limited. We still recognize a rooster, a mosque, or a public bath. The fact remains that Ziapour's pictorial gesture was revolutionary for the time and very demanding for the society. The newspaper Mer Iran from January 1950 related that his painting Public Bath was torn with a knife in Apadana Gallery Club when it was exhibited for the first time. Was the subject with naked women that shocked, or the modalities of its representation? We can't say for sure. This painting, Public Bath, was a way of revisiting Picasso's Demoiselle d'Avignon. And as for Picasso, in his time, the reactions were sharp. The painting Public Bath was also a rereading of European Orientalism. Later, Jalil Ziapour developed another vision of Cubism by using the square or the cube as the geometric basis of his compositions. In doing so, he rooted his paintings in Iranian traditional art by drawing his inspiration from the ancestral Persian practice of glazed tiles. So, contrary to what is generally admitted, the pioneers of new painting have always wanted to adapt their inventive paintings to their Iranian identity. Persian poetry was an important source of inspiration for them. Abdollah Omeri al-Hosseini told that his diploma's project in 1947 was about the Ramsay of Nizami. In the same way, Shoukou Eriosi was graduated with a project on Hafez, entitled How Old You Have Become, Hafez, Chun Pir Shodi Hafez. Before the Sarorone movement, Mahmoud Ejavodipour was interested by calligraphy in his paintings on potteries. Hossein Kazemi and Ushang Epezeshnia were also inspired by contemporary Iranian poetry through the figure of Soder Edoyat. You can see the portrait of Soder Edoyat painted by Hossein Kazemi. Islamic or pre-Islamic religion was another important source of inspiration. One of the first Cubist works of Jalil Ziapour was entitled C'est pas Salar Mosque. Abdollah Ameri al-Hosseini has painted for 3 years a portrait of Imam Ali. At the end of his career, Hossein Kazemi explained he was interested by the mysteries of Mithraism. For example, he mixed different materials with acid to give a rough appearance to the surface of his canvases, referring in this way to the temples of Mithraism in caves, or to Mithra born from a stone. The little-known work of the pioneers was misjudged. Their work and sayings clearly reflect a desire to take root in their culture. The art expert Fereshteh Daftari wrote in 2002, I quote her, "We cannot regard Jalil Ziapour and the other modernists as artists admiring naively the West. They were not brainless puppets." In conclusion, now that the last artists of this generation are dead, we have been able today to pay homage to them. I have showed here how this group of artists contributed to the emergence of artistic and social transformations in Iran. They paved the way for other generations. The second generation of new painting artists, which is Sarorone generation, benefited from their experiments. When the cultural foundation of the Queen Farah became interested in new painting in the 1960s, this new generation had succeeded the pioneers. The pioneers of Tehran put from then on the spotlight on the Sarorone artists. I would like to ask before ending, why these founding artists of the 1940s did not enter Iranian art history. Of course, there's a lack of documentation related to them, and very few of their paintings remain today. Also, partly because of ignorance, they have been wrongly associated with something regarded as dangerous, communism. Finally, I think they have been relegated because they were not recognized in their time, nor later. According to Pierre Bourdieu, an artist is doomed to join the path, to become classic or relegated. The trailblazing painters were overshadowed by the gradually institutionalized concept of new painting to the benefit of their successors, who implemented the ideas they inherited from the original founders. Thank you very much all for your attention.
Thank you very much, Dr. Bombardier, for this interesting and informative lecture. Before getting questions from our audience, I would like to start with a couple of my own questions. I'm very interested in the term new painting that you use in your project instead of modern art. You know, well, we have always this problem. Some of the terms concerning Western art do not wholly fit the Iranian models and paradigms. Here it seems that you have used, let's say, the term new painting as an equivalent of nogara, which is used in Persian literature regarding these painters. So could you talk a little bit more about this term, its origins, and its potential connotations?
Yes, of course, it's a good question. Thank you. Yes, I prefer to use this term because it was coined in Iran by the pioneers themselves. You know, in the 1940s, there were numerous artistic changes. And as we have seen in the manifesto of Ushan et Irani, the artists pointed at these changes by saying, Onahoye Jadid, the new arts. And new painting was one facet of these new arts. You know, there was also new poetry, new miniature, and new painting. So I choose this term because modern painting or contemporary painting are very ambiguous, even anachronistic for the Iranian context. It's not the same periods. You can't say modern painting for paintings from the 1960s. You know, we are in the contemporary period according to the Western history, art history. So I think we have to choose the vernacular term. And it's important now to recollect the modernities outside the Western world by using their own logic, their own terms, and their own temporalities. If I can answer like that to your question, I think it's important now to be very vigilant on the local context.
Thank you. Also, something in your research is quite interesting to me, the way that you talk about generations of new painters. And at the same time, you question why these painters did not get enough attention, even in the 60s. So I was wondering about the differences and similarities between these two waves of new painters during that time. And do you see these waves as some sort of historical categories, or you believe that they are connected? In other words, do you think that the painters in the 60s take advantage of the achievements of the likes of Ziapur?
Yes, of course, of course. The Saint-Laurent artists are the product of the doors opened by the pioneers. The pioneers introduced abstraction in painting in Iran. And if Jalil Ziapur had not fighted against the academic rules dear to Kamal Olmolk's generation, and if he had not introduced Cubism, the Saint-Laurent artists would not have existed. They are two successive generations of artists, and they have abstraction in common. But maybe the Saint-Laurent artists were more had better awareness of what distinguished them from the rest. And I think also they are the product of the identity crisis of Iran in the 1960s. So of course they are connected.
Mm-hmm. Thank you. Now I'm reading the questions that our colleagues in Farhang Foundation are passing to me. There is a question about the relationship between poetry and the painting. You mentioned Nima Yushich. I want to know how much Persian poetry influenced the pioneers of modern painting in Iran.
Yes, it's a very important question. I have a chapter on that question in my book, because of course I think the poets, they opened the way of the painters. Nima Yushich had already revolutionized, had already transferred poetry in the 1920s. I think his poem on candle, I don't remember the title in Persian, but is a very important poem, reformist poem. It was in 1921. So new poetry had already in the 1940s had conference, had already formed a group, and the painters, they imitated the poets. I think few months later they did the same. But if the poets opened the way, the painters also had stimulated the poets. And sometimes, you know, the avant-garde was in the field of poetry, and sometimes in the field of painting. By the way, at the end of the 1940s, they were all together, and the journal of the Rooster Fighting Association was published with the help of the poets, musicians, and so. Even if the painter were the director of the journal, because like the third series of the Fighting Rooster Association of publications was directed by Bahman and Moasses and Sohrab Seperi. So you had the painter very engaged in the project. But in the first issue of the first series of the Fighting Rooster Association journal, you had in the first page a poem of Nima Yushich. So this poem has soaped with a rooster. It was a manifesto. It was the fundamental text of the entire group.
Yeah, and Mohasses himself did some very interesting illustrations for the poems of Nima. Yeah,
I could add just also that the painters, you know, the frontier between new painting and new poetry is tiny, is narrow, because a lot of painters were poets too. You have Manoucher and Yektori, they had published also poems.
Yes, and another Manoucher Shebani as well. Very,
as well.
Yeah, interesting poet.
And Sohrab Seperi too.
Yeah. Good one. Yes, so another question, Alice, from our audience. Dear Alice, thanks for this great talk. In the beginning and conclusion of your talk, you mentioned the period you studied is often ignored in the scholarship. Yeah. I assume you mean mostly in the English language. What is the status of this literature inside Iran? You cited Mojabi, for example. How are Iranian scholars addressing this today? And what's the impact on Iranian artists today? That was the question.
Yeah, I had the luck 10 years ago to meet Ahmad Esfandiari and Mahmoud Javadipour, still alive. But it's true that the book of interviews published by Javad and Mojabi was very important, because it was one of my most important source to study this generation. In Persian, you have a lot of art history book before the revolution or after the revolution that mentioned the pioneers, but very quickly. You know, it's like one page or two, and quite superficially mentioned. Before the revolution, you had during the imperial exhibitions, you had few catalog published, but even at that time, the accent, the spotlight was made on the Saharoni artists, on the generations after the pioneers, because it was publication from the 60s or 70s. And after the revolution, also the pioneers are not often mentioned, because it's also a political taboo to develop this period. So I think this period is not at all explored in the Western art history. And you see that in the exhibitions, the international exhibitions on Iranian art, they are not showing works of these pioneers, because I think they are not recognized as the first introducers of new arts in Iran. And now, but in the 10 last years, we can see, I should add that we can see in the last 10 years more interest about the pioneers. So maybe it's in progress, and now we will develop and recognize these artists. They were still, some of them were still alive, but I just checked this morning that Manoucher and Yektori died a few months ago, like at the end of last year. So now we can make an history after they have disappeared. I think it's important to do this history now.
Okay, thank you. So first, I should thank everyone for very interesting questions. We don't have that amount of time to go through all these questions, and maybe we can finish with this question. Of the paintings that still exist, where are most of them? Are they in the Modern Art Museum in Tehran? If so, were they saved during the early period of Islamic Republic? So maybe the last remarks can be about where are these paintings right now?
I do not know where all the paintings are. Most of them are still in the private collection of the artists. So Mahmoud et Javodipur, the pioneers have still their own paintings. But the the Tehran Museum of Modern Art also has a lot of paintings. And I should say, unfortunately, also a lot of paintings were lost. I quoted paintings destroyed also by acts of vandalism. But in Javad Emojabi book, for example, Abdullah Ameri al-Hosseini said that during 10 years, he had a painting for the workshop of the state, the workshop of decorative art of the Ministry of Culture and Art. And he said that after the revolution, the workshop, this office had lost all his paintings. They had disappeared, and he was very shocked, very desperate by that. He said even he had nightmares because all his work for many years had disappeared. So let's do now a recollection of all these paintings. Maybe they are also in private collection. We do not know, unfortunately.
Okay.
Yeah, I should, if I may, I should add a word. You said, yes, that in the 1960s, they were not recognized. And I wanted to say most of them were not awarded during the Tehran pioneers. And most of them had to do other job to earn money. Or most of them were very poor, I think, of Hushang Epezeshnia, who died close to misery in Paris when he had lived in Paris. So, yes, there is a need of...
Sorry to interrupt, Alice, but I am told that we have only almost 1 minute.
Yes, okay. So I listen to you all. I thank you all. It was a pleasure to speak on this generation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thanks to you and everyone for being with us today again. I hope everyone enjoyed this lecture and learned something about this generation of painters in Iran.
Thank you, Dr. Bombardier, and thank you, Mr. Mirzahi and Dr. Afari for joining us today. And thank you to the over nearly 200 people who were with us today from all over the world. I just want to remind everyone that a recording of today's talk will be available online on all of Farhang's platforms, YouTube, Facebook, Instagram. So that will go live in the next couple of days. So if you can, in case you missed the whole talk, or if you want to share it with your friends, please, you can refer there. And please join us for our next talk in collaboration with UC Santa Barbara, which will be scheduled on February 6th. and we will have more information on that on farhang.org. I also want to thank the Geramian Emrani Foundation for supporting this series. So thank you everyone again. Have a great rest of the day, evening, and we will see you next time. Bye-bye.